Hi, my name is Grigor. I work for the library. And today we're going to be talking about Armenian barbecue and some of the traditions behind it. We call Armenian barbecue chorovat. It's a reason to get together, enjoy a company, eat, and have a great time. The history behind it is a little fuzzy. I don't know all of the history, but I know that as long as there has been Armenian people, there has been the art of grilling meat, or chorovat. We use a type of grill called a magal, which is basically a square metal object where we put the skewers on top and the coal on the bottom and cook it. But as much as we use it now, you don't have to use it because some of the earlier traditions point at chorovats or Armenian barbecue being done even on a floor setting, digging, putting coal in there, charcoal in there, and just using bricks or other stones to prop up the skewers and cooking it that way. So you can make it anywhere in any form, but magal is traditionally used to make the process easier. Best way to start a good fire, first and foremost, would be good coal. Fruit trees were used to start the fire. The bark would be used to start fires. Nowadays, we use a lot of just lump charcoal, mainly of oak or mesquite. And by dousing it with a little bit of lighter fluid, letting it soak in a little bit, and then lighting the fire, it makes the process easier. In Armenia, the more popular meats used are pork and lamb. Chicken and beef aren't as popular in Armenia as they are here. Now with the more modern techniques, younger generations of Armenians, they'll use different cuts of beef, for example, that we didn't have access to in Armenia, and they'll switch it up a little more. But traditionally, pork is really the base, and lamb as well, because a lot of villagers and farmers in Armenia had easy access to lamb and pork. There are times where I had certain stores I visited often, and they would go back and get the meat that was not on the counter. Having a relationship with the butcher is great. Recently, I don't rely as much on butchers. I choose the specific cut I want, and based on the cut, I will go to different places where I can get the cuts. For example, if I want like a pork belly barbecue, I'll maybe use more of the Asian stores that will carry pork belly. And then if I want maybe ribeyes and stuff, I'll use more traditional supermarkets that carry the ribeye, depending on the cut. But having a good butcher is always a good way to get some of the cuts that you can't get anywhere else. Traditional spices, I mean, you always have like the salt and pepper, salt and black pepper. Another traditional spice that's used quite often would be the red Aleppo peppers that are used, some dried basil, dry citron. Traditional spices that aren't used, for example, for my American barbecues that I like doing, I will use like garlic powder and onion powder, mustard seeds, and other spices, but those aren't traditionally used in Armenian barbecues. They're more use of the salt, pepper, dried basil, dried citron, and more of the basics. The younger generation has access to some cuts that we didn't previously have access to in Armenia. For example, recently I really enjoyed making barbecue from boneless short ribs. Another example would be one of my favorites, a Wagyu cut. we don't usually get Wagyu cuts in Armenia, but it's becoming a trend here. And so we have incorporated that into Armenian barbecue, putting it on skewers, which we call shish, and it turns out great. We do a lot more experimental things, and we have access to different kinds of cuts that we don't have in Armenia. So it's quite different. The basics stay the same. Magal is used, the shish or skewers are used, but different cuts and different experiments, different flavoring even is used that traditionally wouldn't be used in Armenia. Like I remember just recently I had a lamb chop with a soy-based flavoring, soy sauce and other herbs, which we didn't have or know in Armenia back in the day. I'm sure they know more about it now, but things are changing. It's really developing, and we have fusions going on. A lot of the basics stay the same when they're trying to make khorovat or Armenian style barbecue. The magal is usually similar, and the skewers are used similar. Some of the spices do vary from place to place. Like I know some areas of like the Persian, Iranian areas like to use like turmeric and cumin, turmeric more actually, and Lebanese areas like to use cumin and other spices they incorporate, but the basics stay the same. With Armenian barbecues, you have a direct heat and fire kissed most of the time. A little more similarities with like Korean barbecues, but American barbecues tend to get more indirect meat and cook for hours and hours. In the past, I know that there have been times during history of Armenia, difficult times during the Soviet regime and stuff, meat was more scarce, so it was a big occasion meal. And I think that's why it became so special at one point, because it was harder to access good cuts of meat and do a barbecue. Whereas now I think it's become more of an everyday thing. I know in my family and my wife's family, we have barbecue at least once a week, many times even more. We've gotten to the point where sometimes, very rarely, we get tired of having barbecue. But it was more of an occasional thing in the past, more of an everyday thing now. I would say there isn't much of a difference. Similarities are there. One of my close friends, he's a chef at an Armenian barbecue restaurant, and when we get together, we pretty much like to prepare the meat the same way. So I think even in restaurants, it's so homemade. It's practically the same thing. Well, at first I made it with my father. It was a good pastime, good quality time with Dad. We would prepare the barbecue together from scratch. And so doing it so many times, I picked up on the traditions and the way he made it, and just continued on. And when he needed help, he already knew that I was up for the challenge. So it was just, I started cooking with my father since I was maybe 10 or 11, and by 13 and 14, he just handed it over to me. Armenian coffee, we call it surch, or a little more slang, just kofe, which means coffee. It's strong because it's unfiltered, and you get to taste the grains literally as you drink it. Surch is traditionally prepared in a little pot we call, with the handle, jazva. For each boiling cup of water, you have 1 teaspoon of coffee, and you bring it to a boil. Once it starts to rise, you know that coffee's ready. It's traditionally just boiling water, just like how an espresso would be drank, but not iced. It depends on your taste, but normally it's a dark roast coffee. It's heavily roasted and it's with Arabica beans. The key, more than the blend itself, I think is just to get it to where it's grinded very finely. So it really soaks into the water and you can taste the coffee well. But different areas and different people like it. I know Edna was a type of coffee that many preferred, was slightly different than the traditional. It's really just up to taste. The key is to get a dark roast that's very fine grain and very finely meshed. Well, it should be a morning beverage, but no, it's usually enjoyed throughout the day. In my immediate family, we drink coffee way more than maybe we should, but every day, few times a day. We like the coffee without sugar, so we will have some sweets on the side, whether it's chocolate or some type of a pastry. I know a lot of times we use the gata or nazook with coffee. So you traditionally with some sort of sweet, whether it's chocolate or pastry. It's pretty strong because you get the coffee and grain straight. It's likened a lot of times to Cuban coffee or espresso shots. So it's traditionally pretty strong and the caffeine content is pretty high. The first time I had a little sip, my father let me, I was probably 6, 7 years old. I was just tasting it and I hated it. I did not like the taste. It was bitter. I was used to sweeter things. I would say when I actually started liking coffee, I was probably around 14, and I had a few sips of it and I started enjoying it. I became an avid coffee drinker when I became 16, but I've always tasted it, and as a kid I did not like it. It was too bitter.